thank you for being here also a Sunday afternoon. I appreciate to be here, and thank you to DSO and Museum für Instrumente and I forgot Haus der Kulturen der Welt. Thank you very much. So when I was asked to participate to this great symposium, my first thought was to point out the politics of music writing in Germany since 1945. Looking at the work and biographies of the most influential scholars of the last 70 years. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Of the last 70 years, their research field, their methodology, looking at the curricula, a thesis soon emerges. The selection, evaluation, and conservation of the great composers reveal itself as a very situated process, performed by a narrow group of musicologists. As a historical musicologist myself, I am continuing the Henschel study, Bürgerliche Ideologie und Musik, from 2006, where he showed that in Germany the fundaments of musical thinking are deeply rooted in the values of the middle class, who produced them, and since the late 18th century. So in that time, the economic and cultural bourgeoisie wanted to distinguish itself from the nobility. It's important to remember the context when these two categories emerges. So the distinction goes along a very common sense today, which is the term of progress and emancipation. So in the presentation by, I think it was you, Harald, you were talking about the reaction of the peers. So yeah, but die müssen doch gut sein. I think it was you, or was it? I'm not sure anymore. About picking new composer. I think about picking a female composer, but they have to be good. It was you.
The meritocracy.
Yes, the meritocracy, that one. So the concept of quality has actually been rooted until the late century. It's not something new. It's something that the middle class established to distinguish itself from the nobility with this high morality complex. So remember that for later. So this is the situation in the 18th century, and in the 19th century, which I started with, we have two more theme coming, which is nationalism and l'art pour l'art, so autonomie der Kunst, which also is very present today in historical musicology. So knowing this, we have great critics, musicologists critic of these, let's say, four main ideologies, which is like progress, emancipation, nationalism. Let's just take that in another form, and l'art pour l'art. So knowing this, of course, we have a lot of critical historical musicologists, mostly actually coming from the US, from the UK, also having an interesting critique about the canon and how music was written in the last 70 years. What I found but more interesting in this case is to look at something that is not associated with complicated or maybe problematic content, which is music theory, and especially opera analysis, where I come from. So everyone is living in Berlin, maybe, who is not living in Berlin. Okay, I mean, so it's okay. What you know about it, okay. This is year 2023, I have to look at so my problem is I cannot read really with these glasses, so I have to find a technique to be able to read and to look at you. Oh, we'll see. So September 2023, Berlin witnessed an advertising campaign for the opera Chief Hijangwa by Namibian composer and conductor Elson Hindundu, German librettist Nikolaus Frey, and German directors, there are two of them, Kimira Meyer and Michael Pulse, and played by Rundfunk Symphonie-Orchester. Supported by the Ministry of State of Culture and Media, Claudia Roth, the Speaker of National Assembly of Namibia, the governing mayor of Berlin, the governing mayor of Windhoek, sponsored by Deutsche Klassenlotterie, Siemens Program, Namibia Investment. This is a long list. So what is important to remember is this is a very broadly sponsored work. And this work was broadly also promoted as being the first Namibian opera. I'm pretty sure everyone remembers that in Berlin. I remember that. So, given the partners and the condition of this production, it's portrayed as successful cooperation between Germany and Namibia. This opera needs more than just a formalist analysis to be understood. We will not understand anything by just looking at the form, looking at the libretto. We need more. And this is the moment when I have to tell us a trigger warning, because I will be talking about one of the most brutal parts of German colonial history. Based on the order of the General von Trotta to extinguish the Herero and the Nama who were resisting against German colonization between 1904 and 1908, there are a lot of questions to ask about this opera. What narratives are told in Chief Hijangwa, and from which perspectives? What musical and aesthetic choices have been made? How does the production addresses German colonial and neo-colonial narratives? Chief Hijangwa has been announced multiple times as a very successful reconciliation work between former colonizer Germany and former colonized Namibia. How did that reconciliation exactly work? I am raising here three theses. First, Germany's reconciliation discourse about Namibia is deeply rooted in colonial narrative. Second, Chief Hijangwa promotes colonial narrative. This is not about intention, this is about performance. Third, how reconciliation discourses affect opera analysis. So I'm starting with the Germany's reconciliation discourse about Namibia is deeply rooted in colonial narrative. So to be able to raise this thesis, this is why I brought so many books. I wrote Czolek, Versöhnungstheater. Really read that book, it's a very important book. So based on Czolek Versöhnungstheater, im Versöhnungstheater ist das Aussöhnen mit der deutschen Vergangenheit und ihren Opfern bereits als vollendete Tatsache vorausgesetzt. And this is exactly what I am addressing in this situation here between Germany and Namibia. So, in his, I already said that, drawing how Germany's institutionalized discourse about Jewish people emerge, Czolek is naming three phases. So the first phase, do I have that? No, I don't have that. Okay, the first phase about the German discourse about Jewish people is between the 50s and the 70s. And it's marked by amnesia and huge denial. This is when the federal parliament and mainstream media refused to see Germany's responsibility and to address the crimes committed by Nazis. Number 2. From the 70s until Wiedervereinigung, called also Erinnerungskultur made in Germany. This is his terminology. So in this second phase, it's characterized by intensifying symbolic act. This is the Kniebeuge, for instance, such as memorial and places. This phase marks the beginning of a new narrative where institutions and mainstream are now claiming reconciliation without any juristic measures against criminal. Third phase, until today and ongoing. It's used the previous narrative to restore and normalize Germany's nationalistic sentiment. And this is where it started, especially 2006 with the Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft, wo auf einmal es wieder möglich war, deutsche Fahne zu zeigen. So this is Czolek theory. And for this situation, it is very useful because Czolek's analysis gives us a great orientation about how Germany's politic, institution, and mainstream discourse are working. When it comes to Germany's colonial history and its ongoing effect, however, I noticed an alarming lack of knowledge in the mainstream and in the everyday life. This is also a problem in musicology. So assumptions which are historically wrong are widespread, making a conversation about coloniality and musicology and opera analysis very difficult. So using Czolek's analysis, the German's reconciliations discourse about Namibia is stuck between the end of the first phase and second phase right now. So we are between amnesia and denial and beginning of the second phase with a narrative of reconciliation. I already told that the difficulty about the lack of knowledge about the German history, the colonial history, and especially the history between Namibia and Germany, is also a problem in musicology because first you have to fight for facts, just to say facts, to say no, this is the moment when I can. Where is my second book? So please read that book if you want to know more. This is a very well documented, and you will have everything, the Kaiser's Holocaust. So being able not to have this conversation about fact, but like going on so we can talk about actually opera analysis would be the first phase of a good opera analysis, and to be able to raise a topic in music theory. So that would be the end of the first point. The second point, if Chief Hijangua promotes colonial narrative. So this is the moment when I have to explain a bit about the piece. So we have the king, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, I have to say it right now. About the king Hangane, has two sons, Nguti, the older one, who will soon be king, and the second one, Hijangwa. Hijangwa love. We have this, yes. Majiwa, this is this circle. This is the main couple. But she is to be married with the older son. So a bit of Peleas, Goulou, Mélisande situation here. Then we have Later on, we have the German part with the pastor and his daughter. There are no mothers in the opera, only the king and the pastor. The pastor has a daughter, and the daughter is soon to be married with the major, but of course Maria is in love with Hijangwa. This is the plot. 4-act opera. First act, Hijangwa and Majiwa, and the impossibility of being together because of marriage. Second act, Hijangwa in the desert, having an epiphany like Thais, and think a lot. Third act, and then at the end of the act he's been found by Maria. And fourth act, Hijangwa live now with the German colony, and pastor doesn't like that there might be something between Maria and Hijangwa, so there's a plot. He encouraged him to go back to his first love, and doing so he follows Hijangwa, and Hijangwa himself kills his father and gives the cue to the massacre of the full people. That's the story. Yeah, there is so much to say. We have not so much time, so I will just say something about the libretto. So I always said there was some very classic trope here with the impossible love. We have some Traviata vibe. We have the mystic experience of Thais. I already said that. We have the violent relationship, father-son. We have also Peleas. A lot of things we knew. However, a closer look reveals the use of a deeply racist trope. Hijangwa, the main character, is naive, easily manipulated. We have this in Othello, and has very savage rage against everyone who contests him. We have this in Monostatos in Zauberflöte, included his own father. So he has like rash rage. This degree of violence committed by the main character against his father is everything but common, since they usually kill someone else. In Don Giovanni, for instance, in Carmen, Jose kills Carmen, Wozzeck kills Mary. So usually they kill their women, but not their fathers. This is new trope. This librettistic decision to make the main character cruel, irrational, overwhelmed by his emotion, and incapable to control them, is deeply rooted in a racist ideology of the 19th century. Most questionable is it appears that Hijangwa's violence against his own people give the cue to the German army to extinguish them. What does that plot say? Is the genocide against Herero and Nama committed by the German army at the end Namibia's fault? Is it what are we talking about here? Nikolaus Frey, the librettist, explained the libretto as a new plot condensed from narrative that have survived through written and oral tradition in Namibia and Germany, and whose origin can be found in the collective memory of all humankind. So this is a very vague term to say, to try to legitimize the plot, but there is actually no precision about which history are you referring to, so we don't know. Also, he do not say that the libretto is actually not written only by Nikolaus Frey, but also by the conductor, who also composed the music, directed the music. He played a very central role. There's unfortunately not really interviews of the conductor about this production. Also not really interviews about all the crew from not only from Namibia, but the singers are mostly coming from South Africa. There are some documentary online, you can all look at them, but like long interview invited by the German medias, they were actually not invited by the German media. So as long as I know, if you know an interview of the conductor of singer by German media, let me know. But as I know, there is no one. There are a lot of interviews from the director, Kim Meyer, a lot of interviews from the librettist, yes, but I cannot remember any interviews from the German media about this part of the team. About the stage direction. The stage direction, I think I don't have, you don't see it really, but you can recognize a bit. This is the end of the piece. So the stage is, it's one block with like three different levels. You have where the team is standing at the end is level 1. On the right, this is mostly the fantastic parts, where the desert part is also happening downstairs, but it's most like the fantastic and mystic part. In the middle, where the left is most the German military is happening there, and up there on the right and the last level, it's where all the dance of the first act are happening. So this is mostly what the scene is. And the orchestra, you cannot see it, was on the last level behind this green thing, like behind it. Yeah, this is the stage. There is no meaning emerging specifically from analyzing the stage direction. Singers come in, sing one-on-one surface, which symbolize a specific place, the palace, the beach, the desert, then appear, then disappear when finished. The stage designer described their intention of creating Namibia landscape. They are talking about the landscape a lot. It seems to be a very important topic, which evoke, the landscape which evokes and a feeling of inspiring topography, contrast and endless horizons. A place with astonishing geographic features where the forces of nature shape both the land and the people, where the exceptional becomes the everyday. End of the quote. As a representative example of the stage direction, we looked at the choir. So the choir, which is the most challenging, every opera director will tell you that it is difficult to direct a choir on the stage. So the choir of the villagers appear on the right side of the construction, standing, dancing, and being sacred. Whoa, 20 minutes. Okay, I'm trying to. I'm like a third of my. It's okay. Five. Okay, no problem. I can do that. Okay, I will just go fast around all this description. But for all people who are in pop culture, the first thing you see also about the costumes is this very Black Panther Wakanda vibe here on the right side, and this is also how the costume. This is the first association when you entered the stage, and this is what you see. You see this big construction, and you see then the choir dancing with this fictional Wakanda costume. I will just go directly then to my, what I wanted to do with this second point was actually to describe more the character and the landscape and the interview, but let's go to the third point, Just a reminder, when I talk about ideology, taking also from Henschel in historical musicology, it's like all forms of unquestioningly, internalized views, values, premises, etc., whose lack of justification is not reflected and unconscious. So I'm not talking about intentions here. Again, I'm talking about performances, context, concepts, and stage directing. So I will just jump that one. There were not so many reviews I could find at that time, 3 reviews, and there is also many reasons why historical musicology has not been really analyzing this opera, because as I said at the beginning, you cannot analyze this opera only with form analysis and the score and directing. You have to go deep in the German colonial history. This is not a pleasant thing to do, I have to tell. So this is what I've been doing for the last, starting for a very long time. So I've been working on opera and rest for a very long time now. And still, for me, this piece is challenging. This piece is very challenging to look at all the atrocity of this colonial history and to look at a product that a team claimed to be reconciliation. This is actually pretty painful. So to avoid that, because the ideology will not go away if we are not talking about it. So it's about to make the analysis visible, to make the process of analysis visible, and to make the people who are analyzing opera and music in general visible. This is what I would like to say. For that, I would suggest an ethic of opera analysis in several points, but much more important is this very concrete technique. This is now for opera, but it works also for music in 5 very easy steps, very easy. First one, description, performance protocol, impression association. Second, categorizing the main concept. This is like a work on yourself, according to the semantic repertoire you are using. Establish the own position. Who am I? From which position I'm talking? Why I'm talking? Which vocabulary I am using? Number 3, internal recording, coming from the semiology. I will go very fast on that. It would be, for instance, what other theatrical references these have. When I see that, for internal recording, I don't have one example right now, but for the external recording would be Black Panther. This is a direct reference to the same aesthetic. And number 5, evaluation. The performance is evaluated with regard to the internal and external recording. So this is about making analysis with being aware what is happening, being aware that opera and music in general is part of the society, is not existing beside everything. And it would be nice also if this process of being part of the society could happen in historical musicology, music theory, and especially opera analysis. Thank you very much.